introduce Maiken Nedergaard from the University of Rochester, who's going to speak on her work on the lymphatic system, long-term effects of lacunar strokes. Maiken?
Yes, thank you. And if I can get full dark slide. As everybody else, I just first want to thank the people who collected the data and my collaborators. So in this case here, it's particular two postdocs, Jeffrey Liff and Lulu Xi, and my collaborators that really have expanded the work has been Dr. Benveniste, Dr. Nicholson, and Steve Goldman. So there is one very peculiar feature missing in the central nervous system. The brain and spinal cord are completely lacking a lymphatic system. The lymphatic system would, in all other organs, basically be the second circulation, and the density of the lymph vessel would reflect the metabolic demand of the tissue. So really high energy demanding organs would have lots of lymph vessels and others would have less. So being a neuroscience, it's kind of peculiar because the brain have one of the highest metabolic state, but we don't have lymph vessels. We all know that the lymph vessels play an important role in immune function, but lymph vessels are also engineered to transport proteins that are present in between cells in the interstitial space back to the general circulation. And if you have loss of lymph vessel, you get edema because you have protein accumulation in the interstitial space. So this is basically how we started out. We asked, why does the brain not have a lymphatic system? But the brain has something no other organ have to my knowledge, and that is that it has a very well-defined perivascular space. So the perivascular space is formed, as in all other organs, by the endothelial cell on the inner membrane, but on the outer membrane, we have perivascular astrocytic end feet that totally plaster along the entire vasculature in the cerebrospinal system. So we have 99.7% of the vasculature covered by vascular end feet by astrocyte. What does that do? It creates a space that's highly defined, and it's basically a donut-shaped space that surrounds all the vessels, the perivascular space. And this has another feature that has been puzzling people in the glia field a lot, and that is that they have, at the inner membrane of the astrocyte end feet, you have expression of aquaporin 4, a water channel. There's actually so much aquaporin 4 expressed here at the vascular end feet that it fills 50% of the surface of the end feet facing the endothelial cell. So why is that strange? It's strange because brain endothelial cell express absolutely no water channels. So you have a closed faucet facing an open faucet, and it hasn't really been explained what are the function of that. Smart people many years ago have suggested that the cerebrospinal fluid have a role that is almost like the lymphatic system. And the idea has been that if you are a protein like beta amyloid present in the interstitial space, you can actually diffuse out to the cerebrospinal fluid, and then you can be transported away from the brain. But other people have calculated that this is probably not a realistic pathway for removal of waste product, because it would take amyloid 100 hours to diffuse just 1 centimeter. It's far too slow to really matter. But one thing you often forget about, and that is that brain is not just about diffusion, which is a very slow process, and it's driven basically by random events, and it matters how big a molecule you are. The brain also have a lot of pulsatility, because we have tremendous big artery feeding into the brain, going into the brain and surrounding it. And that set up a dynamic movement of the entire brain. And one thing that's kind of interesting is that as, for example, the arteries dip down into cortex, they actually connect directly with the cerebrospinal fluid. So if you look here, let's see here, what way should I go? So if you look here, so this space here, the perivascular space, is directly linked to the cerebrospinal fluid and contained in the upper part cerebrospinal fluid. So one of my collaborators, Helene Benveniste, she's asked, can we just image cerebrospinal fluid fluxes by injecting contrast agent into cisterna magna and then image the fluxes of cerebrospinal fluid, testing the idea that we have very dynamic fluxes that not just follow the textbook on cerebrospinal fluid movement, but actually you have a recirculation by the perivascular space back into brain. And this is one of her movies. We inject contrast agent here just below cerebellum, and the movie is 1 hour long, but I hope you would agree that it's almost over in 5 minutes. So you see the contrast agent passing along the vessels here, and you actually see it exit in the olfactory bulb already a few minutes after we have injected it. So we have some very dynamic fluxes of cerebrospinal fluid, which we postulate is driven by the vasculature, and especially the pulsation of the arterial wall. To study this in more detail, to see what's going on, we looked at the perivascular space. And for this purpose, we use 2-photon imaging, and basically what we do is we train the mice to sit still on a microscope stage. Then we have implanted a little cannula into cisterna magna, so we're repeating Helene's experiment, but injecting fluorescence tracer instead of contrast agent. We would record EEG to measure the state of brain activation, and we would just basically use the 2-photon excitation to follow the influx of cerebrospinal fluid. And the big question is, if it occurs, how fast is it? How dynamic is it? Does it really play a role in normal brain function? So in this case here, we are looking 180 micrometer below the surface, and this is in barrel cortex, and we have filled the vasculature with a fluorescence tracer in plasma that's red. And this is just to identify the penetrating artery, and all the arrows point to penetrating artery, because our hypothesis is that cerebrospinal fluid would be pumped down by the pulsatility of the arterial wall. Remember, pulsatility is not just standing like this. This is actually wave that derives from the heart and travel all the way into the cortex. So when we do that, you can see, and this is a 15 minutes movie, so 15 minutes. I hope you agree that you see a very rapid influx. First along the PL artery, you see in a negative outline here, and then you see it dipping into the entire cortex, but first and primarily along the penetrating artery. Let me just show it again. So these events occur within 15 minutes. You have basically a complete exchange of cerebrospinal fluid with interstitial fluid at this time point. This movement has to cost the brain a lot of energy. It's similar to kidney. It takes a tremendous energy to pump fluid around, because it's not just a matter of water, it's also a matter of transport of ions by transporters and channels. So we ask the question, is this transport of cerebrospinal fluid is dependent on the state of brain activation? And in order to do that, we basically trained the mice so well we could have them sleeping and we could have them awake on the microscope stage. And we could inject 2 different tracers in the same animal, image exactly the same field, and look at, do more tracer go in when they're awake versus sleep, or opposite? To validate the different brain states, we basically measure EEG in the opposite hemisphere, and we validate that we either take a awake mice and we anesthetize it here with ketamine xylazine, and we validate this change in brain activity by measuring what's called the relative power of the delta wave, the slow delta wave. Similar, we can start out with a sleeping mouse and we can wake it up. How do we wake it up? We simply have a young investigator sitting at the microscope, and she would put her hand in under the curtain. This is all done in dark, and wake it up by moving the tail. Mice hate to get their tail touched. And this is Lulusi. And how does it look like? So if you look here, this is exactly the same field. In a mouse, we started out with awake, and then we give ketamine xylazine anesthesia. So we injected a green tracer, about 3 kilodalton in the awake state. The same tracer tagged with a red label, Texas red, also 3 kilodalton. And again, it's 15 minutes. So the blue is the vasculature, just to have an outline. And you can see, again, the penetrating artery. First is outline, but already within 5 to 10 minutes, you have a complete exchange in ketamine xylazine anesthesia with in between cerebrospinal fluid. You see here, you can see how it's coming in here. And you see the penetrating artery here. In contrast, in the awake mice, we see almost no influx. Only at the surface vessel, we see a little bit of the tracer coming in here. So based on these studies and several other set of analysis based on reporter mice, where we can separate arteries from veins in the living animal, we developed this concept of the glymphatic system. And the glymphatic system is basically that brain pulsatility drive in the Virchow-Robin space, cerebrospinal fluid in. And you can look at the perivascular space as a highway that has low resistance toward the movement of cerebrospinal fluid in. There's no cellular element, or very few cellular element, compared to the very compact neuropil outside the perivascular space. Then the cerebrospinal fluid would flow into the brain parenchyma. It would meet a tremendous resistance because of the complexity of the brain. In order to facilitate the movement into the brain, astrocyte and the astrocytic end feed express a very high amount of the water channel, again aquaporin 4, to basically direct the flow into the brain. It would then literally swipe any solutes, and this is including amyloid beta, out of the brain. As the convective flow passes to the brain tissue, it would collect around the deep vein. It would exit the brain and basically empty out in the cervical lymph vessels, and by that way reach the general circulation. So is this important? I think it's important because we show that 65% of amyloid in young animals are removed by this pathway. So the brain basically exports its waste in our mind. So it's a macroscopic clearance system. Another thing that's probably as important for this audience is that it's long been known that perivascular diseases or small vessel diseases in brain is linked to an enlargement of the perivascular space. It has been somewhat of a mystery why you have specific atrophy in these areas, because you did not really have a function before of the perivascular space. What we are stating is that the perivascular space play a very important role in what we call the glymphatic system. So we call it the glymphatic system because it's glia-driven, it depends on glia water channel, and it has functions similar to the lymphatic system in other organs. But we are claiming now that these fluxes in the perivascular space have an important role in clearance of molecules present in between the cell, in between the interstitial space. This is interesting because the field of neurodegeneration have basically established very systematic over the last 5 years that all the proteins that have been linked to neurodegeneration, so this is synuclein, it's tau, it's amyloid, etc., that although most of these proteins are used as intracellular cytosolic proteins, they're also present in the interstitial space, and they're thereby available for removal by the glymphatic system. We can ask a couple of other questions about the system. For example, what happened aging? And for this study here, which is in press, we injected cerebrospinal fluid tracers, and we prepared 30 minutes later brain slices to look at the distribution basically of cerebrospinal fluid influx into the brain. And we injected a small and a big tracer, and this is how it looks in a young mice. If you look in the old mice, it's very significantly reduced. Especially if you plot it as a function of aging, you see for the small tracer, you have a reduction of glymphatic influx. That is 85% reduction in glymphatic influx in old mice compared to young mice. We have a gender difference or sex difference, such that female mice have about 30% reduced glymphatic influxes in the young age, but the difference disappears in aging. What triggers these age-dependent suppression of glymphatic fluxes? I believe it's many different things, but one thing that probably have not really been discussed or studied much is that with aging, you have the stiffening of the vessel wall. Many people have been interested in how the pressure gap between systolic and diastolic pressure changes as a function of a stiffening arterial wall. But what also happens is that the elasticity of the vessel wall decreases and thereby there would be less pressure to drive perivascular fluxes in. So we can actually measure that by using 2-photon line scanning, and we can show that in aging you have very much reduced movement or pulsatility of the vessel wall. Finally, I just want to show new unpublished studies where we have adapted a model from Mike Moskowitz's group where we induce small infarcts in the brain. We inject cholesterol pills into mice, and we produce pretty much incomplete infarction. This infarct can be recognized 1 week later by the infiltration of microglia cells in the small incomplete lesion. The small lesions that are labeled here in red are surrounded by huge area of reactive gliosis detected by increase in GFAP. So our question was, if we look at lymphatic influx in a mouse like that, would you have a reduction in influx just in the lesion, or would it include this big area surrounding the small lesion? I hope you agree with me that we have a reduction in influx of cerebrospinal fluid detected as a green tracer that include most of the same hemisphere. So it's a whole hemisphere that's affected and have suppressed lymphatic influx. So the summary is just that I think we should start to take cerebrospinal fluid fluxes more serious. We should look at the perivascular space as an important unit for both discovery of disease mechanism, but possible also for treatment, and glial cells certainly play a role in that, and so does sleep. The lacks in the knowledge is that we basically know very little about this. We need first and foremost to show that the system also is functioning in human brain, and if it is important in removal of amyloid, we need a diagnostic test of it.
Thank you very much, Maiken. A few minutes to entertain some questions. I have a basic question, and that is, so there is no interchange of the CSF at the capillary level, presumably because the Virchow-Froben space doesn't exist, that it's fused, is that right?
There seems to be, it depends on the tracer size.
Depends on the tracer
large
size.
tracers would not reach the capillary.
Okay.
So,
Good. Gary?
Yeah, the spinal fluid is actually made by the capillary.
in part, yeah.
60% in a monkey comes from the capillary, and it's released into the CSF through the white matter, where there is white matter in larger animals, and drained out through the lymphatics. But the other thing that happens, so my question is, that could be one site where the reduction is going on with the change in the capillary. The other possibility is that when you absorb the spinal fluid, it goes through the arachnoid granulation. And if you study, and people don't do this anymore, but there was a thing called cisternography, where you would put a tracer into the CSF and follow its flow out of the brain, and it would get hung up in the older patients and stay for a longer period of time. So I guess my question is, you have a source in the capillary, you have a sink in the arachnoid granulation. Can you
so the data I showed here was only cerebrospinal fluid reflow into the brain because we inject into cisterna magna. I did not show data looking at clearance of the fluid from the brain. And you're right that the clearance suggests there's another source, which most likely are the capillary. Yeah. So there's two sources of influx, one exit of it.
And maybe in the aging animals, too, you may have a slow absorption through
all
the
that
arachnoid
is up
granulation.
for defining, and I totally agree. So of course it's complex. It's all complex.
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation. I haven't thought about this at all, but I was very fascinated with the increase in the circulation during phases of sleep, and I would like for you to just comment on it, whether or not as you go from fast wave to slow wave, is there a pulsicity in the pulsicity in terms of the perivascular circulation? And, you know, this is sort of carrying it to a functional parameter. If individuals are sleep deprived, then you don't have this sort of recirculation of the cerebrospinal fluid that would affect cognitive function or something. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking that's really interesting and how important quality sleep is for the health of the brain. So it's more of a comment, but I would really like you to speculate on
Yes,
this
we-
pulsicity
yeah,
of going in and out of
Yes, so
fast
we
and slow wave
actually
sleep.
postulated when we published this work that the purpose of sleep was to clear interstitial protein. And you need to go in this phase where glial cell changes from being supportive of synaptic function and really ensuring that synaptic function is precise in time and space to go to a syncytium-like function where the might supported by the delta waves, with slowly moving waves that actually follow the glymphatic fluxes. Yeah. They come from frontal and go back and inward, exactly like the glymphatic, that you go into the mode of cleaning your brain. And this is why any animal, and human that die if you sleep deprive them long enough. The other interesting aspect of it is that all cognitive decline in aging and different dementia are linked to loss of sleep quality, fragmented sleep, less deep sleep, and the interconnection by those, what is the chicken and the egg, I think is a big outstanding question. And I think many groups are studying it very well now in the sleep field. And there are pretty good, I think, clinical studies suggesting if you report that you're a poor sleeper in middle age, you're more demented when you reach 75, age of 75 years old.
We have time for, on that thought, we have time for one more question, a very short one, please.
Mike, and I'm just curious about conditions that change the level of aquaporin 4. And I realize it's bulk flow, but couldn't that slow?
So sleep increases the expression of aquaporin 4, so there are studies suggesting that. I don't think aquaporin 4 is a driver of it. It just facilitates, it reduces resistance towards the movement of the cerebrospinal fluid.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.